Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the channel and a truly unprecedented moment as I am now talking about not only Jason Aldean but modern country for 2 videos in a row. But this video is actually something that I've wanted to make for about 2 weeks or so, and that's kind of like an update follow-up video to my most recent video, which was comparing Jason Aldean's most recent hit single "Try That in a Small Town" to Charlie Daniels' "Simple Man" from 1989, and just in general my commentary about all of the controversy around that song, which I thought was honestly blown out of proportion. If you haven't watched that video, go ahead and click the tag that's up here or just go to my channel and look it up. But that video is certainly worth following up on because this single, "Try That in a Small Town," is now the best performing single that Jason Aldean has ever released in terms of chart placement, as it entered the Hot 100, the all-genre mainstream Hot 100 at number 2, easily becoming his highest peaking Hot 100 entry. His previous highest on the Hot 100, I think, was "Burning It Down," which hit number 7 back in like 2014 or 2015. So this became his biggest mainstream chart topper. And then the week after that, it climbed to number 1. So Jason Aldean, with "Try That in a Small Town," 20 years into his career, now officially has had his biggest mainstream chart success ever, and it's with an extremely controversial, politicized song, easily the most political song of his career, the most controversial song of his career in terms of mainstream press coverage by far, and it is a number 1 mainstream Hot 100 hit. And it proved that it was not just a 1-week fluke. In today's very sensationalized streaming and social media age, it's actually very common for songs to just go viral, hit the chart and peak really high, have a really high debut for like a week, and then they just crater off the chart, right? This actually happened a couple years ago, just for an example, with another similarly minded political country single, which was "Am I the Only One" by Aaron Watson. Yeah, right here I meant to say Aaron Lewis, not Aaron Watson. 2 very different singers, which 2 years ago, the summer of 2 years ago, caused a lot of public attention because of its politically charged lyrics, and that momentum caused it to debut at number 11 on the Hot 100 or something like that, which was by far Aaron Watson's biggest hit. Again, meant to say Aaron Lewis, not Aaron Watson, in terms of chart placement. But then the next week, it fell off the chart completely. So it really was like a 1-week wonder. You can't even really call it a hit. But Jason Aldean hit number 2, debuted at number 2 in the Hot 100, climbed up to number 1. So it climbed up even higher on the chart, and now I think it's in the 20s in the Hot 100. So it's not some 1-week sensational viral fluke. It is a legitimate hit, already one of the biggest singles of Jason Aldean's career in terms of quickness of sales. Obviously he has several multi-platinum hit singles over the course of the almost 20 years that he's been in the genre, in the game. So we'll see how this stacks up with his total sales over time. But just in terms of immediate chart sales and streaming success, this song "Try That in a Small Town" is literally one of the biggest singles of Jason Aldean's career already, except at country radio. And that is the focus of today's video, because for the first time in his career, Jason Aldean is out of sync with country radio, which is crazy because, as I've now just said, this is the biggest hit in terms of chart placement of Jason Aldean's career, yet country radio, who love Jason Aldean, it is no stretch to say that country radio freaking loves Jason Aldean, and basically everything he puts out, they're going to push that to number 1. He has 25 number 1 hit singles on country radio to date, and despite that, they are handling this thing with latex rubber gloves like it's toxic, hazardous nuclear waste. They don't even know what to do with this, and it's fascinating to watch. At the moment, on the Billboard Hot Country Airplay chart, Jason Aldean is currently sitting at number 20 with "Try That in a Small Town." It is only the 3rd single of his career to date to not at least hit the top 10 at country radio. The other 2 are "Relentless," which was the title track of his sophomore album. I actually really like that song, and I was surprised when I'm doing the research that song did not hit the top 10. I thought it was a bigger hit than it actually was. And then the second is "1994," which I think came out in 2013. Both of those peaked in the teens at country radio, definitely could be considered minor hits, but along with Try That in a Small Town, which currently, as I said, sits at number 20, those are the only 3 singles ever that have not hit the top 10 at country radio for Jason Aldean. Country radio and Jason Aldean are like, buddies, like they love each other. To date, Jason Aldean has released 39 singles, and as I said, 25 of them have hit number 1 at country radio. Basically 2/3 of the singles Jason Aldean has ever released have gone to number 1 at country radio. And so as I like to do, I'm going to tie this back to various examples in country music history and give my commentary. And I'm also going to be breaking down what the discrepancy is between country radio and the mainstream hot country singles chart, because I'm sure some of you don't even know this. There are 2 different mainstream country music charts, at least 2 different primary ones. There's actually like a ton of different ones. There's like a country digital sales chart. There's a country holiday chart that deals with Christmas songs exclusively, I'm pretty sure. But I'm talking about like the 2 big ones, hot country singles and country airplay. Those are the 2 big ones that matter whenever artists talk about their songs going number 1. Those are the 2 that they're usually talking about. Those are the 2 that mainstream press in general talks the most about. And there is a lot of history there. So if you do want to skip ahead, every video I put out when I get new audience members, I saw a lot of new people commenting on the last video. I do tend to have a really big wind up and ramble a lot in these videos. So there are chapter segments in these videos. They're along like the duration bar on the bottom. It's actually broken up into little segments, little chapters. So if you want to skip ahead of the segment that I'm about to launch into, which is discussing the history and the discrepancy between the country singles chart and the country airplay chart, you've been warned. Go ahead and skip it right now. Skip to the next chapter. You have the ability to do that. You can follow along on the bottom or click like the next button or go into the video description and click on the different chapters, because I'm about to go on a ramble about the difference between country radio and country singles sales. This is your last warning. Skip it now. If not, you're locked in here with me right now. So the current manifestation of the country radio airplay chart, whatever its name is, it's gone under a bunch of different names over the years. The current manifestation was established in January of 1990. Now, 1990 was a very important year for country music. That was the year of the massive generational shift from the old school, old era artists like Merle Haggard and George Jones and Conway Twitty had, their last successes in the very early 90s. And as much as I love, the early 90s to mid 90s era of country music, I love a lot of those singers. Their ascendance was definitely, manufactured almost, in the sense that as soon as guys like Alan Jackson and Mark Chestnut, Travis Tritt, that whole generation, Garth Brooks, of course, of new school neo-traditionalist country artists, as soon as they came in, old school artists like Conway Twitty, Earl Thomas Conley, George Jones, Merle Haggard, you know all the names, artists who still decades into their careers have been successfully racking up hit singles up until then, were just shoved out of the way. Like they really were. Like you could look up Wikipedia and see their chart successes over time. These artists who were hit makers for decades immediately fell off a cliff in terms of their chart success as soon as 1989 turned into 1990. And a big reason for that probably is the shift from the main country sales chart incorporating radio airplay and physical sales to being airplay only. So what that means is, yes, every single iconic number 1 country hit of the 1990s through the 2000s by every artist from George Strait to Alan Jackson to Reba McEntire to Martina McBride to Josh Turner, Joe Nichols, Gretchen Wilson, you name the name, if they were active in the 1990s or 2000s, their number 1 hits were determined solely by radio airplay, not sales. And when you look at the system prior to 1990, it is a bit easy to see why they might have decided that airplay alone should determine chart placement, because previously, all the way from, like the 1940s when they first started tracking, these charts and, the successes of songs and sales and radio airplay, you really kind of had to rely on the honor of disc jockeys or record store owners to successfully and rightfully keep account of what they were actually selling and what quantities and what they were actually playing on their radio playlists. there wasn't really a super accurate way to like keep track 100% of what was being played, what was selling, and what wasn't. But then the 1990s was the dawn of the Neil SoundScan era, where they literally would put barcodes on albums, so every single time an album was purchased and scanned, it would count as one official sale and it would be logged. Same thing with the new era of country radio airplay. It became much easier to track what was being played. So along with the massive commercial country boom of the turn of the 1990s, it just became more accessible and easier for the music industry to keep track of what was selling, how many copies of what was being purchased by consumers, and what people were listening to and what DJs were playing on the radio. And so this era of complete radio primacy in country music lasted up until the early 2010s. But then this era ended in 2012 when abruptly the US Hot Country Singles Chart, which by this point had been radio airplay only for over 20 years, was now renamed the US Country Airplay Chart, and a brand new chart was introduced, or actually I should say an old chart was revived when the new chart, now called the US Hot Country Chart, was introduced as a parallel chart. So basically the old chart was renamed, and then the new chart, which was actually a revival of the old pre-1990 sales and airplay chart, was just given the name of the radio only chart. This is all really stupid in semantics, I know that, but basically what happened was in 2012 the country music industry and Billboard reintroduced a chart that tabulates both sales and radio airplay, not just airplay alone. And so that is why when you look at, the Wikipedia pages of, modern country artists, you will see actually two different chart placements for all of their singles in the United States. And often there is a discrepancy between how certain artists perform at country radio versus how they perform on the sales and streaming chart. And that is what the Hot Country chart currently tabulates. It keeps track of not just radio airplay, but also sales through online digital retailers like iTunes, and of course also streaming through Apple Music and Spotify. And I believe that those two latter elements are a big reason why this chart format was reintroduced, because back in the 1990s when they made the switch to radio only, I mean, think about it. Music consumers pretty much only purchased full albums back then, right? You would go to the store and you'd purchase a CD or a cassette or a vinyl record, and that counted as one sale for each full album. There were ways to purchase individual songs. You had cassette singles, you had CD singles, and in fact in the 1990s country artists would still put out 45 RPMs, but these were typically promo only or jukebox only. So there were ways to purchase individual songs back then, but they were not as common, often not available to the public. And so this is why, sales of singles certainly did not matter as much to record labels and especially to radio DJs back in the 1990s and the 2000s. But of course, once iTunes got into the picture and streaming, this is what changed throughout all of the music industry, not just country music. When iTunes, streaming, and all that came along, every song on an album became a single, even if it was commercially released or not, because now consumers had the ability to only pay for the songs they want or only listen to the songs off the album that they want. You no longer had to purchase only the full album or only the cassette single of whatever that artist's current single was at the time. If you only wanted to purchase a deep cut non-single off, some old artist's album, you could do that. You no longer had to purchase the full album to listen to whatever songs you wanted to listen to. So back in the 1990s, they didn't have the ability to do that. They didn't have the ability to say, more people are listening to tracks 7 and 8 off some Michael Jackson album than tracks 1 and 2. There's no way to keep track of that. Whereas now with streaming services, you can see individually which songs are streaming and being listened to by more consumers compared to other songs on the album. Albums nowadays aren't even really full cohesive works. They are basically just collections of commercial singles. And this has truly impacted chart placement. And I'll actually use an example from rap. This is just an example I thought of off the top of my head to really show this discrepancy. So 3 years ago, the first big hit of the year 2020 was a song called The Box by rapper Roddy Ricch. This song became the first #1 hit and was a #1 hit for multiple weeks on the Hot 100 before even being released as a commercial single. This song was charting higher and performing better than newly released singles by pop stars such as Justin Bieber and Selena Gomez. It was outselling them, it was outstreaming them, and eventually it outperformed them through radio. The way that was even possible was because Roddy Ricch, just about a month prior, had released his most recent album. Fans streamed the album. People decided, we really like this song called The Box. We're gonna stream it like crazy. We're gonna listen to it on YouTube, every other digital, social media outlet. We're gonna spread it through there. We're gonna purchase the song on iTunes. And so through that alone, not radio airplay, the radio airplay era is dead. Through pure sales and streaming, that song became the #1 song in the country for multiple weeks before it was ever released as a commercial single. That is a complete manifestation of the streaming era of music that we are currently in. And we are seeing that now with Jason Aldean. Now we are transitioning into the next chapter. If you skipped ahead of that chapter, welcome back. So Try That in a Small Town is ironically, simultaneously, Jason Aldean's best performing single on the charts ever in terms of the sales, streaming, plus airplay chart, but it is to date Jason Aldean's worst performing single on country radio. How is this possible? Well, the song generated tons of controversy, tons of headlines. People who supported it obviously went and bought it on iTunes or streamed it like crazy. Critics of it could not stop talking about it. This all generates press and more attention towards this single specifically. People just drawing attention and listening to this single a lot. Country airplay have all of the decision power to say, this song is controversial. We love Jason Aldean. We always play his stuff, but this song in particular, it's causing a lot of controversy. So we're just not going to play it as much as Jason Aldean's stuff usually does. So that is how Jason Aldean right now simultaneously has his best performing sales and streaming plus airplay chart song ever. That was a mouthful. And also his to date worst performing song on country radio. For the first time ever, Jason Aldean and his fans are out of sync with what country radio wants. Now, what will happen next is going to be very, very telling. And this is why I'm definitely going to keep an eye on what Jason Aldean does next with his next single and what he does with his upcoming album rollout, because Try That in a Small Town is going to be the lead single off of whatever album Jason Aldean is doing next. This is the lead single. What I'm going to be looking for is what country radio does with Jason Aldean's next single. If Jason Aldean releases his next single to country radio after Try That in a Small Town, the momentum dies down a little bit, and country radio accepts it with open arms, it immediately goes top 10, and they move on like nothing else happened. That was just a blip on the radar. Welcome back, Jason Aldean. This song isn't controversial. It's like, typical run-of-the-mill Jason Aldean songs. Then, Jason Aldean's career in mainstream country music will continue on as normal. But if the next single also doesn't perform well at country radio, that, in my opinion, will signal the new era of Jason Aldean's career. And this will mean Jason Aldean, one of the biggest country singers of the past 20 years, will be entering a phase that pretty much every other country star before him has had to go through, which is being pushed out of the mainstream via country radio. Remember that transition I mentioned in 1990, not just the transition from the sales plus radio chart to the chart becoming radio only. I talked about the generational shift, the rise of Clint Black and Alan Jackson and Travis Tritt, and then the previous generation, Hank Williams Jr., George Jones, Merle Haggard being put out to pasture. It really was, like in the late 1980s, Merle Haggard and George Jones, that whole generation, they were still loved by their record labels, and then as soon as the calendar turned to 1990, suddenly it was, hey man, thanks for all these years, but got to get out of here now. Your legacy act, you'll go on down to, you'll perform at the Grand Ole Opry every few years, and you'll go down to Branson, but as far as radio is concerned, us major labels don't need you anymore. It was literally like night and day between the late 1980s and early 1990s. And that is something that eventually does happen to every single country singer, no matter how successful they are or how long they were successful for. It happened to Alan Jackson in the early 2010s. Over time, country radio just stopped playing his stuff. He released that album Good Time in 2008. That was, almost 20 years into his career, launched a bunch of hit singles, but just a few years later, his singles only started hitting the top 20. Then over the next few years, he fell off the chart completely. Same thing happened to George Strait. He had his last top 5 hit at country radio in 2013. I think there's even the campaign for get George his 60th #1 by his 60th birthday, and I think it actually fell short. That single hit like #2. I think the single was Give It All We Got Tonight. That was his last top 5 hit #2, and then immediately after that, his next album, Cold Beer Conversation, was like dead on arrival at country radio. He released 2 singles from that album. I even remember in 2015 hearing the title track, Cold Beer Conversation, on radio, and that was the only time I ever heard it, because both songs were dead on arrival at country radio. They were just like, okay, time to stop playing George Strait, he's done. It was literally like they got him that last top 5 hit, and then just, okay, George, get out of here now you're too old, we got to focus on the younger guys now. They just deliberately choose after a certain point to stop playing people on country radio. Now, yes, George Strait a couple years ago did have another top 20 hit with Every Little Honky Tonk Bar, but obviously the other singles off that album, Honky Tonk Time Machine, didn't even come close to that. That was, a fluke almost. George Strait is definitely done at country radio for the most part. And so if Jason Aldean's follow-up single to Try That in a Small Town is similarly unsuccessful, I believe that will be the start of Jason Aldean's, you could say, veteran phase, or just his transition from superstar to legend, if you want to even call Jason Aldean a legend. I'm no fan of his music. I criticized his style quite a bit in the previous video. I'm definitely not a fan of Jason Aldean or modern country, but for the sake of, convenience, let's just say that would be his transition from current superstar to old school superstar, And Jason Aldean has had a good run. Like I said, it's been almost 20 years. He has been, a top 3 male country singer ever since 2005. There's never been a time where Jason Aldean is not, one of the top 5 most successful male singers in the industry at any given moment. But if Try That in a Small Town continues to stall at country radio, and his next couple of singles also don't perform well at country radio, I think that will be the end of Jason Aldean's mainstream country music career. Now, of course, as I just mentioned with my example of The Box by Roddy Ricch and how that, demonstrates the massive discrepancy between what radio DJs want to play versus what the public is actually listening to and consuming, obviously Jason Aldean will be fine. He won't just, fade into obscurity and, he won't ever have successful songs ever again or successful tours ever again. Clearly, despite the fact that country radio doesn't like Try That in a Small Town, his fans love it. It is his highest charting single ever in terms of mainstream chart success, as I've said now several times in this video ad nauseum. You're probably getting sick of me saying it. So Jason Aldean will not, fade into complete obscurity, like so many country artists before him have, even if they were stars for quite a number of years. He will be fine. He will still be a superstar. He will still be a successful touring act. He will still have millions of fans, but it will just be interesting to see if Jason Aldean ever gets a big hit at country radio again after this, because unfortunately it might get to a point where country radio says, Jason Aldean, he's too political now, he's too controversial, we just can't play him anymore, it's too much of a risk. As crazy as that is, especially considering how successful Try That in a Small Town has been, there's no doubt that it is a hit song. People have been buying it and streaming it like crazy. It is a mega hit. Country radio might say, you know what, this is finally the time to push him out and, replace him with some, new guy. It is crazy to be talking about Jason Aldean like this, considering that he has been, one of the biggest modern stars of the past 20 years, but we'll have to see. This could be the point where Jason Aldean's mainstream career finally dwindles down. What do y'all think? Let me know in the comments section. I enjoyed a lot of your comments on the previous video, even some of y'all who disagree with me, so I'll be sure to read through your comments on this one. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. See you guys next time.